Hello, my name's Andy. Welcome to episode 53 of Keeping Water. This episode, the first of my second year of YouTubing, was going to be a little short and somewhat negative, focusing mainly on problems. That was until I came across something while trawling through some footage I took with my new GoPro dome. It was something that I thought might happen, but was in no way convinced by my own arguments that it would. What it is, along with other footage I shot while testing the dome, I'll show you towards the end of this episode. As you'll have noticed from the thumbnail and intro, and later with the outro, I've made some thematic changes to the channel. I would welcome your feedback, although I must be honest that I like them and I am pretty stubborn. In this week's episode, in addition to the wonderful surprise, I'm going to cover 3 problems I'm currently experiencing. Firstly, algae, which suddenly blossomed a couple of weeks ago. I'll explain why I think it appeared, what I did about it, and how well that worked. Secondly, I'll give a brief update on the fish's health problems. Not the full story, but an update on how things are now. Finally, I returned from holiday recently to find the pond 3 to 4 inches lower than it should be, with some water on the filter shed floor. The picture's not as clear as it might seem, however. Before we get to all of that, I'd be really grateful if you subscribe to the channel. It will help you keep up with my weekly video releases and help me keep the channel moving forward. Also, please add any comments and questions you have below, and I'll do my very best to reply. Also, I have a Keeping Water Instagram account, keeping_water, on which I post some pictures and videos that don't always make it onto YouTube, so it would be great if you'd follow me there as well. With all that covered, let's start this episode by taking a look at the glorious stuff that is algae. To be honest, I quite like algae. It helps in creating a more natural feel to the look of the pond, which is obviously really helpful when you have a pond like mine. I tend to not have too many issues with algae though. I like covering over the liner and some string algae growing in reasonably small amounts by the inlets from the filters. We should all be fine if it kept at that, but every now and then it starts to spread and grow longer, at which point it can threaten to take over. Which is what happened a couple of weeks ago. The algae went from a nice natural looking growth to something more, seemingly overnight. At first I was a little confused. I often get some significant growth as winter turns into spring, but at this time of year it's pretty rare. Eventually though, I worked it out. A combination of 2 things gave the algae the perfect conditions. Due to adding treatments to the pond, I didn't complete a water change for 10 days, meaning I missed 2, maybe 3 changes. When I did, I decided that I'd do a larger than usual water change, about 40% of the pond. The problem with that, as you may know from previous episodes, is that I have quite a lot of nitrate in my tap water. My filtration, under the usual routine, deals with it and the nitrate converted from nitrite with no issues, but the increased amount of nitrate from the larger water change all at once, coupled with the lovely amount of sunshine we've been having, meant the algae was well fed and consequently flourished. So I decided to treat the pond. I used Clearwater's blanket weed treatment, which, although I can't point to any good empirical evidence of its effectiveness, I can at least share my own anecdotal feedback, which is that it's always worked for me. Whatever the amount or type of algae growth I've had, it's also caused no harm to the fish or my plants, and on top of that, I found out I can only use about 60% of the recommended dose to still get a good result. Therefore, a few days before I went on my holiday, I treated the pond, and then returned to this result. All of the unwanted growth had gone, and most of the dead and dying algae had been picked up by the filters. Now, I could add a maintenance dose in a few days' time, but there seems little point, and I've not experienced a second growth in the past, so I'll probably skip that. Additionally, I may need to treat the fish, which is what I'll move on to now. As I've said in previous episodes, my carp have experienced some health problems over the last weeks. I plan to do a single video in the future, going over everything in detail. However, I think it's useful to give a quick update now. The problem started with some jumping and flashing. I used an anti-parasite treatment and the flashing and jumping quickly stopped and hasn't returned. After another week or so, however, the mirror carp developed what looked clearly like white spot. I repeated the anti-parasite treatment and the white spot cleared up, only for the common and then the mirror to develop what looked like white fungal patches, for which I treated with a fungal bacteria treatment, which is where I'm at now. The patches have got no worse, but equally they haven't gone. I was due to give a second dose just before I left for my holiday, but didn't want to leave the fish just after treating them. So I'm at the point of deciding what to do for the fish now. I could do a second treatment, or I could do nothing and wait and see, or I could do something completely different. I welcome anyone's advice. Just for additional information, since they stopped flashing and jumping 3 days after the start of the first anti-parasite treatment, the fish have shown no behavioural indications of ill health. For example, lethargy, irritation, flashing or jumping, lack of appetite, clamped fins or spitting out food. They appear, skin patches aside, in good health, active, eating well and their usual selves, which all means I'm not as worried as I otherwise would be, but obviously would like to solve what's going on. Speaking of solving problems, onto a mysterious leak, or more accurately, a mysterious loss of water. On returning from my holiday, I obviously checked the pond, mostly to see how the fish and algae had progressed in my absence. The first thing I noticed, however, was that the marginal plants had grown literally about 2 foot, and more positively, that the creeping jenny was getting better and better, and was spreading over the planted area and growing over and towards the water exactly as I'd planned and hoped. But I digress. The next thing I noticed was that the water was low, as much as 3 to 4 inches lower than it should be, which is really quite a lot of water. Water loss is obviously always worrying, and my first place to check was the filter shed. I did find some water on the shed floor, although it was by no means enough for the amount that was missing from the pond, and after checking the pipework, there were no leaks or drips. All the joints and pipes were bone dry. Additionally, prior to going on holiday, I'd flooded the shed during cleaning the filters, and although I'd attempted to clean it all up, the water on the floor could be remnants from that. Looking at other causes, I thought of the extremely hot weather and therefore evaporation, but again it seemed to be too much water to be explained by that alone. So, I completed a filter clean, with no flooding this time, topped the pond back up and also cut the plants back. Time will tell what's been going on. Will the water level drop? Will more water appear in the filter shed? Will an obvious leak reveal itself? We'll see. Although as the next week will be full of rain rather than sunshine, it may not be clear cut. I'll update next week. Right, on to the positive exciting news, which I only discovered by chance when testing my latest toy. A dome for my GoPro, which I bought to show above and below the surface at the same time, which was perfect, I thought, for filming the fish feeding. So anyway, what I do when filming with the GoPro is to film for a couple of hours or so, and then spend a similar amount of time looking through the footage to either get an impression of behaviour or interactions, or just to find some cool or impressive clips. Sometimes I look through the footage at real speed, and sometimes I just scrub through, stopping at what appears interesting, which is what I was doing with the dome footage until I saw something pass through the screen, which really looked like, well, but it couldn't be. I rewound and watched it back at normal speed, and it was Fry, swimming past the camera as if they'd always been there. As you'll know if you've watched previous episodes, I've suggested that the rudd were approaching maturity and would soon spawn, as their parents had done in the pond a few years previously. I'd also seen behaviour from the rudd that was indicative of pre-spawning behaviour, for example, chasing each other, but I'd not seen any actual spawning. Unlike carp, it's pretty easy to miss rudd spawning unless you're actually by the pond, as they make far less noise and indeed mess. So, I thought they might spawn this year and expected them to spawn next year, so it's not entirely surprising, as the spawning brushes in the pond would also indicate. What I'll do next though, I'll talk about more in next week's episode. What follows next are some more less fry focused clips from the test filming. I hope you enjoy it, and there'll be more to come in the future. Thank you so much for watching this episode of Keeping Water. I really do appreciate it. If you've enjoyed it, I'd be really grateful if you think about liking and subscribing. I hope you'll also come back next week when I'll talk more about the fry, the possible leak, and how the bigger fish are doing. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.